The 2005 film adaptation of this classic Jane Austen novel has brought Pride and Prejudice movie quotes to a whole new demographic of audiences. Starring Keira Knightley, Rosamund Pike, Donald Sutherland, Matthew McFadden, and many others, Pride and Prejudice was a remarkably wonderful adaptation. This period drama wasn't as stilted and dreary as many period dramas. This romantic drama connected with a new generation, and is still widely watched and admired by fans. Jane Austen's works continue to be some of the most popular adaptations since their release in the early 1800s. Austen's novels have stood the test of time as people read and reread her work for her prose. Her universal plots and characters are as relevant now as they were in the 19th century. There have been several adaptations of Austen's work. Thanks to the Pride and Prejudice movie quotes, it remains a highlight from her adaptations, still connecting with audiences over 20 years after its release. 25. My good opinion, once lost, is lost forever. Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy speaking with Elizabeth in Pride and Prejudice 2005. The theme of every version of this story is in the very title. While Elizabeth's pride is wounded from her initial interactions with Mr. Darcy, his prejudice doesn't allow him to see her family as the loving unit they are. His good opinion is already hard to earn. When he explains who he is with this line, however, it's also made clear, before the audience knows the full story of Wickham, that Mr. Darcy is very decisive and stubborn. Once he's formed an opinion about someone, it's very hard for him to change his mind. If someone has already earned his admiration and then does something to lose it, he is not the kind of man to freely offer forgiveness. That's very clear in the situation with Wickham. Mr. Wickham breaks Georgiana's heart after making her so many false promises that Mr. Darcy will never trust the man he once considered a friend. 24. One of these days, Lizzie, someone will catch your eye, and then you'll have to watch your tongue. Jane Bennet. Keira Knightley as Elizabeth and Rosamund Pike as Jane Bennet reading a letter in Pride and Prejudice. While some of the characters in Pride and Prejudice believe that Elizabeth Bennet has such a caustic sense of humor about the men in society because she's bitter about not being married, that's not the case. Elizabeth turns down proposals because she only wants to marry if she truly loves someone. Love matches were not exactly the norm in Jane Austen's lifetime. It was much more common for a marriage to be more transactional, a way to bond two families and protect interests like land and inheritance. Jane is often the one amused by Elizabeth's comments about the men in society around them. Despite that, she sees through what others assume is bitterness. Elizabeth genuinely doesn't like all of the pretending involved in society and dislikes that she is not supposed to be herself in public. Jane's insinuation here is that one day, Elizabeth might feel the need to curb her opinions in society once she does fall in love. The beauty of Elizabeth's relationship with Mr. Darcy is that she doesn't have to. He loves her even through his misconceptions of her and her biting remarks to him. 23. With so evident a design of insulting me, you chose to tell me that you like me against your better judgment. Elizabeth Bennet. A gold-tinted image features Elizabeth Bennet in the foreground and Mr. Darcy in the background for Pride and Prejudice 2005. When Mr. Barkey attempts to tell Elizabeth Bennet how he truly feels about her, he does it alongside a litany of reasons he shouldn't feel anything for her. He says unkind things about her and her family, but he's not entirely meaning to be unkind. He simply wants to explain his perception of events, and that he cares for her despite that perception. Elizabeth, however, is not swayed by his being honest with her. Instead, she only becomes even more furious with him. She does not understand how he can expect her to be happy about his growing feelings for her while he stands in front of her and insults her to make his point. A variation of this conversation occurs in every version of Pride and Prejudice, but Keira Knightley's reaction as Elizabeth is perfect, and her hurt and anger is part of what makes the exchange so memorable. 22. What have you done to poor Mr. Darcy? Charlotte Lucas. Charlotte Lucas in Pride and Prejudice 2005. On its own, this line might not appear particularly memorable. Fans of Pride and Prejudice, however, know that it comes after a baffling exchange between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, baffling for Elizabeth, that is, not the audience. Mr. Darcy comes into a room to speak with Elizabeth, already aware of his growing feelings for her. While they exchange pleasantries and Elizabeth offers him tea, he denies the tea and effectively bolts from her presence. He leaves the room just as Charlotte comes in, and since Elizabeth and Charlotte don't have the same context for his actions as the audience, he looks like a man spooked by a ghost, or potentially, terrified of something Elizabeth has said to him. It makes Charlotte's line amusing, but it also makes Elizabeth's admission that she has no idea what she's done equally hilarious. 21. Though she may well perish with the shame of having such a mother. Elizabeth Bennet. Mrs. Bennet talking by a window in Pride and Prejudice 2005. While Elizabeth might find most men she meets objectively awful, her mother understands the reality of the situation better than Elizabeth. The Bennet family consists of older parents and 5 daughters, 2 of whom are already older than the age most women are married in the era in which they live. None of the daughters will inherit the family property and there is no modern safety net for them. That is why Mrs. Bennet schemes and matchmakes at every possible opportunity, including when Jane gets a cold and is, fortunately, confined to a wealthy person's house to recover. While Mrs. Bennet gets dramatic, discussing the potential for Jane to actually die, Mr. Bennet is sure Jane will not be dying from a cold. Elizabeth makes fun of her mother though, noting that Jane just might die of shame at her mother's antics instead. While Elizabeth has no problem mocking her mother in front of the rest of the family, of course, she doesn't do that when they are in public or at a society event. Despite her mother's antics annoying her and embarrassing Jane, Elizabeth clearly still loves her dearly.